Welcome, my dear chosen one. You've carried something sacred in silence, longer than you've ever admitted. A memory that doesn't quite belong to this timeline, yet keeps visiting you through dreams, sensations, and unexplained waves of emotion. There's someone you were meant to meet in this life, not by chance, not by desire, but by soul agreement. Before either of you wore a name or a body, there was an understanding. If one of you lost the way, the other would remember. And you did. You remembered. But what happens when the one you remembered decides to forget? When the soul you once recognized in a single glance begins to act like a stranger, as if nothing sacred was ever shared? You've asked yourself 1,000 times what went wrong. You replayed conversations, signs, the connection, the collapse. But there's a truth that runs deeper than circumstances or behavior. The one your soul called mine may have made a choice you didn't expect. The choice to break the spiritual contract that once held you together. This isn't about rejection. It's about spiritual responsibility. And what happens when one soul refuses to rise to it? And while you're still feeling everything, trying to understand why you're the only one who seems to care, the invisible weight of that ancient promise presses against your heart. It's not just love you're mourning. It's the betrayal of something eternal. That's why this message found you now. Because there comes a point where even the most faithful soul must ask, am I still honoring a truth? Or just refusing to let go? Today, we'll go deeper than closure. We'll step into the wisdom hidden beneath this soul tie and uncover why only your awakening can set you free. If this already resonates with your journey, let your voice be heard in the comments and stay connected. Because what you're about to remember may change everything you thought you knew about letting go. There are certain connections that don't begin in this lifetime. You feel them before they speak, before they touch, before anything makes sense to the mind. It's like your soul recognizes something ancient in them, a vibration that echoes something unfinished. That's why it hurts so deeply when they leave without explanation, or worse, stay while becoming unrecognizable. Because this wasn't just love, it was memory. And memory doesn't ask for logic, it demands healing. Many people talk about soulmates as if they are just romantic fantasies, but those who carry spiritual memory know that some souls don't arrive to complete you. They arrive to trigger you, to activate something in you that has been waiting lifetimes to awaken. Sometimes, their presence isn't meant to stay, but to stir, to expose what you still need to heal. And often, what you see as heartbreak is actually the breaking of an old karmic wheel that needed to shatter for your evolution to begin. But here's the part few speak about. Sometimes, that other soul felt the same thing you did, but chose not to honor it. Not because they didn't care, but because their ego was louder than their spirit. They weren't ready to meet themselves through you. And what began as a divine recognition turned into spiritual resistance. They pulled away, not from you, but from everything you reflected back to them. Their truth, their purpose, their pain, their unfinished work. And yet, you stayed. Not always physically, but energetically. You kept holding space, keeping the portal open, believing that if you stayed loyal to the connection, it would eventually realign. You confused loyalty with sacrifice. You confused faith with delay. But the truth is, you can't walk someone else's path for them, even when your soul still feels tethered to theirs. Especially then. Because the longer you try to carry what they refuse to claim, the more you begin to forget yourself. There comes a moment in every spiritually aware being's life where they must face the cost of staying loyal to someone who has already left in spirit. It doesn't always come with closure. Sometimes it comes with silence, with dreams that linger, with emotions that feel too old for this life. And in those quiet moments, you begin to realize you were never abandoned by them. You were being redirected back to yourself, because the promise you made to remember them was never meant to destroy you in the process. But here's the dilemma. How do you let go of something that feels spiritually unfinished? How do you release a soul you still feel in your body, your dreams, your energy field? The answer is not found in forcing closure or chasing resolution. It begins by understanding that letting go isn't the same as forgetting. It's about accepting that your part of the contract has been fulfilled. You remembered. You loved. You remained awake. And now, the chapter that matters most is your own return. And that's where the illusion breaks. Because the pain you've been carrying isn't just about them. It's about the silent agreement you made with yourself to never give up on something sacred. But here's what the sacred truly means. It never asks you to suffer in silence or wait in bondage. If the love was real, it still is, but its form must evolve. What was once a soul tie must now become a soul release. When you carry the you, memory of a soul contract that the other person has chosen to forget, you begin to feel the weight of both stories, yours and theirs. It becomes a kind of spiritual double life. Outwardly, you're moving forward, doing your work, showing up. But inwardly, you're still checking for signs, still wondering if they felt it too, still listening for a voice that no longer calls your name. And slowly, you start to fragment. Not because you are weak, but because your energy was never meant to sustain two paths at once. The soul begins to grieve not just the person, but the version of reality it hoped to live. And this grief, when ignored, begins to rot in silence. Some nights, it shows up in dreams that feel more real than waking life. Other times, it's the wave of sadness that hits you without warning, just when everything seems calm. It's not obsession, it's resonance. It's your field still echoing the vibration of what was once aligned, but is now dissonant. And yet, part of you holds on because you think, if I let go completely, what if that means I failed? What if that means I gave up too soon? But giving up and choosing freedom are not the same thing. And the soul knows when the door has already been closed, even when the heart is still knocking. There is something cruel, almost, in how life gives us glimpses of a connection so pure, so undeniable, only to let it dissolve in front of our eyes. But there's a reason this happens to certain souls. Not everyone is called to be a bridge. You are. The ones who carry remembrance in their DNA are often chosen to hold the tension between what could be and what is. And while that may seem unfair, it's also sacred. Because to be the one who remembers means you hold the keys to evolution. But here's the paradox. Remembering alone does not mean you are meant to complete the story. As much as you may have tried to stay open, energetically, emotionally, even spiritually, there is a moment when your own soul begins to rebel, when the fatigue becomes more than just emotional, when your body gets tired of waiting, when your gifts begin to fade because your spirit is starving for space. And that's when the truth starts to rise. You are still loyal to a bond that was broken without your consent. you are still nurturing a connection that cannot breathe on its own. And that loyalty, while beautiful in its intent, is starting to cost you more than you were ever meant to pay. There are invisible contracts we sign not with other people, but with pain. We say things like, "I'll wait until they come back," or "maybe next lifetime." And those phrases, though romantic, are dangerous when left unchecked, because they become scripts we repeat in our minds until they bury our present. Until we forget we're allowed to want peace more than resolution. Until we forget that sometimes the most divine act of love is release. Not with anger, not with bitterness, but with the solemn grace of someone who finally understands, "I kept my promise, and now I must keep it to myself too." And maybe that's what no one ever told you, that choosing yourself after holding space for someone else doesn't make you selfish. It makes you sovereign. You are not here to drag someone else toward their destiny. You are here to embody yours so fully, so unapologetically, that if they ever wake up, they'll know exactly where to find truth again. But you cannot pause your journey, shrink your light, or carry their karma in hopes they'll finally see. The soul cannot thrive while waiting in emotional limbo. It needs movement. It needs air. It needs permission to live again. So now, the real question arises. What do you do when the person your soul recognized has already chosen a different timeline? Do you keep knocking on doors that spirit has already closed? Or do you begin the sacred walk back into your own heart, not with regret, but with reverence? Because if you look closely, you'll realize something powerful. The pain you feel is not the end of the story. It's the threshold of your initiation. And only you can decide if you will stay trapped in a memory or rise in the truth of who you are becoming now. There is a sacred truth that many resist because it shatters the illusion that love alone can fulfill a contract. The truth is, the person your soul was once aligned with may have made a conscious choice to abandon the agreement. Not in malice, not even in full awareness, but through a series of spiritual refusals. Every time they turned away from their growth, every time they ignored the call to heal, every time they chose ego over expansion, they were rewriting the script of your story together. And sometimes, the hardest pill to swallow is knowing that someone you still feel so deeply simply chose not to remember. This is where the illusion begins to dissolve, because spiritual contracts are not chains. They are invitations, and every soul, no matter how profound the connection, has the right to say no. This doesn't make them evil, nor does it make you foolish. It simply means that your paths have reached a sacred divergence. They chose the loop. You chose the leap. And with that choice, the original agreement became null. Not because you failed to keep it, but because you were the only one still holding it with reverence. And here's where the burden can begin to lift. You do not owe your life to a soul that rejected its own awakening. You are not obligated to carry the torch for someone who keeps hiding from the fire. It is not your job to redeem their storyline. That was never the mission. Your mission was to remember love in its purest form, and then embody it, regardless of who stayed or who fled. That mission is still alive in you, but now it must return to its rightful place, at the center of your own becoming. There's a quiet kind of liberation that comes when you finally understand this. The bridge between you and them was never meant to be a permanent dwelling. It was a passage. You built it with devotion. You waited at the edge. You even tried to cross it alone, but they never arrived. And now, the most sacred act you can perform is to take one final look at that bridge, and then walk away from it, blessing what it taught you, but refusing to bleed for it any longer. Because you cannot cross into your destiny with hands still reaching for someone else's resistance. What remains now is your power. Not the power to change what happened, but to change what you do with what remains. The ache, the memories, the longing, all of it can be alchemized into strength, into clarity, into forward movement. But only when you stop waiting for an ending that may never come. Closure is not always a conversation. Sometimes it's a decision made in sacred solitude, when you finally whisper to yourself, "I remember who I am," even if they never do. And in that remembering, something profound awakens. The realization that your love was never wasted. It was transformative. Not for them, perhaps, but for you. Because it cracked open places in you that had never been touched. It showed you your own capacity for truth, for loyalty, for vision. And now that same love must be reclaimed. Not to give away again, but to build the next chapter of your life with deeper wisdom. This is not abandonment. It is ascension. You didn't fail the contract. You fulfilled it, even alone. You kept the light on. You held the space. You remembered the sacred when no one else did. And now, your soul is asking for something more. Not more waiting, not more hoping, but more living. This is the shift. The invitation to finally pour everything you were giving to them back into yourself. Not as revenge, but as resurrection. Because your light was never dependent on them, it was only mirrored there for a while. What happens after the letting go isn't silence, it's realignment. For the first time in a long time, your energy begins to return to you. It's almost imperceptible at first. You start to breathe a little deeper. Your thoughts soften. The weight on your chest lifts. Not because the pain disappeared, but because you stopped feeding what no longer nourished your spirit. This is where you begin to understand. The love you gave was never meant to be validated by their response. It was meant to awaken the parts of you that still needed to know what unconditional love feels like when it's directed inward. There is something profoundly sacred about reclaiming what you once gave away in fragments. Piece by piece, you begin gathering the parts of yourself that were scattered in that connection. The parts that waited, that begged, that questioned their worth. You no longer need them to return, to explain, or to validate your side of the story. You are no longer surviving on imagined outcomes. You are remembering that you were whole before they arrived, and you are still whole now, even after they left. And that wholeness isn't just a healing. It's a preparation for something greater than what you were willing to settle for. Because here's the truth. If someone had to abandon themselves in order to be with you, they were never truly with you to begin with. Love that requires disconnection from self is not love. It's dependence. It's spiritual avoidance. And perhaps what you experienced wasn't just a broken connection, but a divine intervention. You were being protected from building a life with someone who didn't yet know how to be loyal to their own evolution. You were spared the burden of being someone else's life raft. And now, you're being invited to become your own sanctuary. There's a shift that happens when you stop asking, "Why didn't they choose me?" and start asking, "Why did I keep choosing someone who couldn't meet me?" That shift is powerful. It removes you from the role of the abandoned and places you in the seat of discernment. You begin to realize that love alone is not enough to build something sacred. It also requires timing, consciousness, and mutual accountability. You can forgive someone and still recognize that they are not your spiritual equal. You can bless their path without joining them on it. And most of all, you can love without losing yourself in the process. This is not about bitterness. It's about boundaries. It's about honoring the truth that your love deserves to land in places that are ready, capable, and devoted. You are not here to convince anyone of your worth. You are not here to play healer to someone who refuses to acknowledge their wounds. You are not here to wait lifetimes for someone to remember what you already carry in your spirit. If they're not choosing themselves, they cannot choose you. And that is the most sobering yet liberating truth of all. So now, as you rise from the ashes of what was, you begin to see clearly. Your soul wasn't broken. It was being refined. Every unanswered question, every delayed message, every dream that never manifested was part of a greater design to bring you home to yourself. And home is not a person. Home is the energy of self-trust, of alignment, of peace that no longer depends on someone else's presence to be sustained. You are learning to be the closure, the healing, the answer you were seeking. And in that process, you become untouchable. Not because you've hardened, but because you've awakened. The past no longer owns you. It shaped you, yes. It stretched you. It taught you what longing feels like, what hope can do, and what illusion costs. But now you are learning the difference between destiny and attachment. And that clarity, though born in grief, will become your compass. Because the version of you that waited, that pleaded, that clung to the memory of what could have been, is no longer in charge. A new voice is emerging, one that speaks of freedom, sovereignty, and sacred redirection. And that voice is your own. There's a quiet revolution that begins the moment you stop trying to be remembered. When you release the hope for an apology, a change, or an awakening from someone who already chose to forget, you start accessing parts of yourself that were buried beneath grief. The pain doesn't disappear. It transforms. You stop resisting it and start understanding it. And through that understanding, you transmute it. Healing was never about forgetting them. It was about reclaiming the parts of you that kept dimming your light to keep a fading connection alive. As your energy returns, so does your clarity. You begin remembering who you were before the entanglement, not through nostalgia, but through rooted sovereignty. You reclaim your voice, your truth, your path. What once felt like a tragic ending reveals itself as divine protection, not from love, but from the illusion of love that wasn't ready for your purpose. Slowly, you stop dragging their shadow behind you. You speak more kindly to yourself. You release the need for closure from someone who never had the courage to truly see you. These small shifts are massive spiritual revolutions. Because in a world addicted to validation, choosing peace is radical. And that's where restoration begins. Not through their return, but through your own. You come back to yourself. You stop waiting to be chosen and choose yourself. Not from ego, but from sacred devotion. You start a new chapter, one not defined by someone else's choices or timelines. The past no longer holds power here. The pain no longer has a voice. Only truth remains. And maybe this was never about reunion. Maybe it was always about restoration. The pain was preparation. The loss was a mirror. And now you're ready to receive not confusion, not fragments, but clarity, sacred love, and your full presence in the now. This journey was never meant to end in bitterness. It was meant to end in remembrance of your strength, your sacred clarity, and your divine resilience. You were never here to save someone from their own avoidance. You were here to become the kind of soul that no longer begs for recognition, because you've come to recognize yourself. And now that you've walked through fire and didn't burn out, now that you've lost and still remained intact, what else is there to fear? You've already survived the grief of being forgotten by someone your spirit still loved. And yet, here you are, still breathing, still rising, still glowing. There is a version of you now emerging that no longer seeks to rewrite the past. You are no longer trying to go back to the beginning. You've outgrown the need for explanations. You've outgrown the illusion that someone else holds the missing piece. You now understand that nothing was ever missing. You were simply remembering in layers, learning through longing, awakening through absence. And what you've gained is priceless. Discernment, wisdom, and a quiet kind of power that doesn't need to shout in order to be felt. You are not here to repeat cycles. You are here to complete them. So let this be the moment where the soul contract is closed. Not with resentment, but with reverence. You kept your promise. You waited. You hoped. You held the light long enough for both of you. And now, you walk forward not because you stopped loving them, but because you started loving you more completely. That's the shift. That's the moment the energy breaks. That's the sacred return to your own timeline. The one no longer delayed by what someone else refused to claim. And if this entire message has spoken to a part of you that no one else seems to see, write it in the comments. Speak it aloud. Let your energy say it first, even if your voice is shaking. I want you to write now. I release them. I choose myself. Daddy, and if this journey mirrors your own, leave your like and subscribe. Not just to stay connected with these messages, but as a signal to the universe that you're no longer apologizing for your light. I would also like to give a special thanks to everyone who supports our channel. If you want to help us continue producing content, you can support us through our Buy Me a Coffee. Just click on the link in the first pinned comment. And before you go, don't forget to watch the video we recommend here on the screen, or the playlist, The Secrets of the Chosen Ones. Each video was made with you in mind, so that you can continue growing spiritually. Thank you for being with us. May God bless you abundantly.